"You'll leave after the wedding," he promised. But the Mafia boss knelt down and begged. The rain had turned cold and biting by the time Claire left the clinic, seeping through her thin sneakers and draining what little warmth remained with each weary step. Her shift should have ended hours ago, but a backlog of paperwork and an emergency appendectomy had kept her there until just shy of midnight, her stomach clenched with hunger. But she was used to skipping meals. Maybe tonight she'd dig out an old packet of instant noodles, if anything was still left in the cabinet. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and exhaustion, pulling her worn hoodie tighter around her shoulders. Claire counted the minutes until she could collapse onto the torn-up sofa in her tiny apartment. But as she turned the corner into the staff parking lot behind the building, she stopped short. Beneath the flickering streetlight sat a sleek black Mercedes, unmoving, like a predator lying in wait. It was spotless, silent, and completely out of place in this worn-down neighborhood. At first, Claire thought someone had taken a wrong turn. That was until the rear window slid down and a man's voice cut through the curtain of rain, crisp and unmistakable. "Miss Claire Bennett?" She squinted, pausing for a heartbeat. "Who was asking?" The car door opened. The man who stepped out wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a dark tie knotted with surgical precision, as though he'd just walked out of a boardroom on Wall Street or a crime report on the evening news. His face was sharp, expressionless, cold as forged steel, and every step he took carried the quiet, calculated presence of someone unfamiliar with being told no. "My employer would like a word," he said. "It concerns your father." Claire's heart tightened. Her father had vanished nearly 4 years ago, without a single message, leaving behind nothing but unpaid debts and a repossessed apartment. She wasn't sure what came out of her mouth, but the man simply tilted his head, then gestured toward the open door of the car. Inside was a black leather interior, silent and warm, like a trap long prepared. She should have turned around and walked away. Every part of her reason screamed for her to do just that. But 4 years without a word. 4 years of unanswered questions. 4 years carrying a wound that had never closed. These things had their own weight, and now that weight was pulling her toward that car with a force she couldn't resist. Claire stepped inside. The door shut behind her like a period at the end of an old life, and the first doorway opened to everything she never saw coming. If you've made it this far and find yourself unable to pull away from Claire's story, then don't forget to subscribe to the Dear Single Mom YouTube channel, so you won't miss a single heartfelt and gripping tale like this one each day. Here, we don't just tell stories. We hope to walk alongside you through the quiet corners of life, through every decision, every moment that tightens the chest before lighting a spark of hope. If this story moved you, please like and share the video so that more people can feel what you just felt. And where are you listening from? Drop a comment below to let us know where our voices are reaching across the map of the world. Now, let's return to the next chapter of the story, where Claire will come face to face for the first time with the stranger in the car on that rainy night, and hear the offer that may change the rest of her life. The moment the car door clicked shut, the interior of the Mercedes seemed to swallow Claire whole. The scent of genuine leather mingled with a trace of high-end cologne, warm enough to almost make her forget the cold soaking into the hem of her pants. The cabin was lit by a soft glow, the seat beneath her so plush it felt like she was sinking. But it was the man sitting across from her who truly unsettled her heartbeat. He wasn't as old as she had imagined. On the contrary, Julian Reyes looked just past 30, with neatly cropped black hair and sharp, angular features. His deep brown eyes held the quiet stillness of glass. But behind them was the storm of something unspoken. The charcoal suit hugged his frame with precision, and even the smallest of his movements carried the ease of someone who never lost control. When he spoke, his voice was low and smooth, touched by an accent that was hard to place, something between Havana and Manhattan. But each word landed with a weight that warned her not to dismiss him. "Thank you for getting in the car, Claire. I know my appearance may seem sudden, but I believe I have a good reason." She didn't answer, only watched him with wary eyes. He knew her name, where she worked, the hour she finished, and now he was here, watching her with a gaze that suggested he already knew far too much. Julian leaned forward, opened a small compartment, and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. He placed it between them, with the care of a surgeon laying down a scalpel. Inside are photographs of your father, recent ones. Claire didn't reach for it. She looked at him, her voice hoarse from the cold and something rising like fear in her chest. He's alive? Julian nodded, never breaking eye contact. Alive. Relatively well. He's at a facility under my control just outside San Jose. Costa Rica. She swallowed hard. Her lips barely moved as she asked the next question. Why? Why is he there? Why has no one heard from him all these years? Julian leaned back, hands clasped. Your father, Paul Bennett, worked for a financial firm connected to one of the companies in my network. Not directly, but close enough to sensitive information. 4 years ago, he discovered irregular transfers and tried to use them as leverage. Unfortunately, he didn't realize some secrets aren't meant to be bargained with. Claire shivered. Not from the cold, but from the shape of a story she wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Was he kidnapped? No. Julian shook his head. He was moved, kept safe, taken far from the reach of people who wanted him to disappear permanently. I made sure that didn't happen. I gave him a place to live, a place he can't leave, but also a place where he won't be killed. Why? She asked, her voice sharper now. Why would you do that? You don't even know him. Julian tilted his head slightly, a flicker of something close to amusement in his eyes. Because I saw a father in him. Someone's father. And now, I need you. You need me? Claire repeated, her voice hollow. Julian nodded. A deal. A fabricated relationship. You'll play the role of my fiancé for 6 months. Purely for show. When it's over, you'll walk away. Free. With enough money to clear every debt you've ever known. And more importantly, your father will be released. She leaned back, pressing into the seat. Every word was a cut. 6 months. A fake marriage. With a man she had just met. Inside a luxury car on a rainy night. In exchange for the life of the only family she had left. Julian watched her, his eyes unblinking. I'm not joking. Claire, I'm not forcing you. I'm offering a choice. You have time to think. But know this. There are others who want this situation ended. Permanently. And I don't know how long I can keep them waiting. She lowered her head, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Julian continued, his voice softer now. You have time to consider. 24 hours. After that, I'll need an answer. The car had started moving, so smoothly she hadn't even noticed. At some point, she had left the hospital far behind, when the vehicle circled back to her old street, where the streetlights still flickered above shallow puddles. Claire looked out the window. Her old world was still there, but something had shifted, irreversibly. And she knew, from the moment she stepped into that car, there would be no turning back. Claire could not quite recall how she stepped out of the car. Everything after Julian's proposal had turned viscous, as though time itself had thickened around her. When the black Mercedes rolled away in silence, she was still standing in the rain, the icy wind slipping down her collar and numbing the back of her neck. She clutched the envelope he had given her, her fingers trembling not only from the cold but from the weight of what might lie inside. Inside her worn-down apartment, the windows fogged over and the electric heater let out its usual faint, uneven crackle. Just like every other winter night, Claire peeled off her damp hoodie, tossed it over the back of the chair, then sank onto the couch, her eyes fixed on the envelope now resting on the coffee table. She knew the moment she opened it, something would shift, permanently. And yet, she did. Inside were 3 photographs and a small memory card. The photos were printed on matte paper, like passport images, but clear enough that there could be no mistake. The man in the pictures looked thinner, more gray in the hair, more wear in the face, but the eyes were the same. The eyes she had grown up knowing. Paul Bennett, the father who once walked her to school under the rain. The man who vanished into thin air while she was barely keeping her head above water during her final term in nursing school. In one photo, he sat on a wooden chair with mist-covered hills rising behind him. Soft tropical light filtered through a gauzy curtain. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling the sob building in her chest. He was alive. After all this time, she slipped the memory card into her laptop. The video was under a minute long. The first sound was a faint buzz as the image came into focus. Her father sat at a table, hands resting in front of him. A white wall behind and the rhythmic hum of a ceiling fan overhead. He looked straight into the camera. He didn't smile, but there was a faint, unbroken gleam in his eyes. "Claire, if you're watching this, then you know. I'm sorry. I had no other choice." His voice was ragged, uneven, his breath short, but his gaze was calm, resolute. "Don't blame Julian. Without him, I wouldn't be here to say this to you. Don't believe everything you hear, but don't believe anyone completely either. Use that mind I was always so proud of. Decide for yourself." Then the screen went black. Claire sat there for a long time, motionless, for one fragile moment. All she wanted was to lay her head down and weep like a child, the way she had during those long nights in her second year of college, working evening shifts, attending class by day, and waiting for a phone call that never came, a sign that her father hadn't simply vanished off the face of the earth. She had mourned him. She had believed him dead. But he was alive, held somewhere like a prisoner. And she was the key to his freedom. 6 months. A marriage. With a man whose name could freeze the pulse of Chicago's criminal underworld. Claire got up and paced the narrow room like a caged animal. She wasn't naive. She knew Julian's offer wasn't some act of mercy. He hadn't kept her father alive just to let her walk away afterward. 6 months of pretending to be his fiancé was no small price. Not with a man like Julian Reyes. But the truth was, she had no other choice. She had tried. For 4 years. She had tried. Police reports. Private investigators. Even pleading on late-night local television segments. No trace. No clues. Paul Bennett had simply disappeared. And now, somehow, this man in the perfect suit had brought him back. On his terms. She looked at her laptop screen, now dimmed to sleep mode. Her own reflection stared back, pale and drawn. She thought of her father, of that fractured voice, of those eyes that seemed to carry truths she wasn't ready to face. Julian had given her 24 hours, but she knew time was more fragile than that. In his world, things could shift with a single phone call. And the man in the video, that was all she had left of family. Claire shut the laptop. Outside. The rain hadn't stopped. But inside her, a storm had begun to steer. And if she had to walk into a marriage with a man like Julian Reyes to bring her father home, then she would. But not with blind obedience. She would walk in with her eyes wide open. And if this was a game, Claire swore to herself, she would not be a pawn. She would be a player. Claire did not sleep that night. She sat curled on the old sofa, knees drawn to her chest, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. But it did nothing to warm the cold seeping from somewhere deep inside. The heater clattered on with its usual tired rhythm. Yet the air in the apartment remained bitter. Rain tapped against the window in relentless cadence, each drop like a nervous heartbeat echoing the pressure in her chest. On the table, the envelope with her father's photos and the memory card remained untouched, silent, like a witness that had already said too much. That video had etched itself into her mind so vividly that every time she closed her eyes, she could see his face again, hear that rough, tired voice that somehow still carried strength. Don't blame Julian. But don't fully trust anyone either. Use the mind I've always been proud of. Claire remembered every word. They hadn't sounded like advice. They had sounded like a warning. And that was exactly why she couldn't sleep. For years, she had taught herself to live without him. Had once believed he was dead. Had once cursed his name. But never. Not for a single moment. Had she stopped hoping that someday something, anything would explain what had happened. Now that he was alive, that hope no longer felt like salvation. It felt like a weight. At first light, Claire rose from the couch. She made coffee with hands that trembled as she poured boiling water into the mug, the familiar scent filling the room with a hollow comfort. 8 a.m. She reached for the phone. The number was scribbled on a small piece of paper tucked inside a second envelope Julian had handed her before she left. An encrypted line, he had said. Only available at certain times. Only usable once. Claire had hesitated all night. But now, she needed to hear his voice. Not on a screen. For real. She took a breath, typed in the numbers, and pressed call. 2 rings. Then a click. The voice came so softly she wondered if she was dreaming. Claire, is that you? Her heart clenched. Yes. It's me. Are you okay? Has anyone hurt you? Are you being held somewhere? He gave a soft, weary laugh, older than she remembered. No. No one's hurting me. It's not bad here. But it's not freedom either. Claire gripped the phone tighter. Why didn't you say anything for all these years? Do you know what I went through trying to find you? I nearly went broke paying investigators. I thought you were dead. Her voice cracked. I know. I'm sorry. Sweetheart, I didn't think it would go this far. By the time I wanted out, it was too late. What I found wasn't child's play. It was money laundering. Investments in things you don't want to know about. And Julian Reyes? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Do you trust him? There was a pause, long enough to tell her father was choosing his words with care. I trust him enough to know that without him, I wouldn't be alive to speak to you. But don't mistake saving a life for kindness. Julian doesn't do anything without a reason. And this time, that reason is you. Claire's hand tightened around the mug. I don't understand. I'm not beautiful. Not wealthy. Not the kind of woman someone like him would pick for a wife. Not even a fake one. So why me? Because you're the only one unconnected to his world. Her father answered. You're clean. No ties to crime. No media presence. No political strings. You're a blank slate. Easy to build an image around. A quiet, trustworthy fiancé to keep up appearances. And because you're my daughter, that makes you the perfect leverage. Claire said nothing. She knew he was right. Julian could have picked anyone. But he had chosen her. Not because she was special, but because she was simple, pliable, convincing. A nurse worn thin in the heart of Chicago, with no family, no money, no influence, the perfect pawn. Just remember one thing, her father said, his voice rasping. Whatever you decide, don't lose yourself. Don't let anyone make you forget who you are. I didn't raise you to be a bargaining chip. Claire nodded before realizing he couldn't see it. I won't forget, she whispered. I promise. Then the line went dead. One call. No repeats. She sat there, motionless. The phone still cradled in her hands like the last relic of a world that no longer existed. And inside her father's words carved deeper than anything Julian had said. Don't mistake saving a life for kindness. And Claire understood. She was about to step into a game where her father's survival, her own, and perhaps even Julian's, would depend on every move to come. Claire waited until night had fully fallen before she reached for the number Julian had left her. She didn't want to call too early. Didn't want to call too late. She needed the timing to be precise at a moment he wouldn't expect, because if this was a game of power, Claire would not be the one stepping into it empty-handed. She dialed the number, and the phone barely rang once before the line connected. Julian's voice came through, deep and calm, as if he had known all along that she would call. I'm listening. Claire. She took a breath, standing upright in the narrow living room, eyes fixed on the photo of her father resting on the table. I'll do it. 6 months. She paused, letting the words carry weight. I'll accept your terms, but not the way you want. I have conditions. Julian was silent for a few seconds. Then came a faint, unreadable chuckle. I'm listening. First, I want my father to receive proper medical care. I'm not asking you to bring him home, I know that's not possible. But I want regular health reports. I want him checked by a professional. And I want a video each week. Clear footage. No edits. Nothing cut. Julian replied without hesitation. Agreed. Go on. Second, I don't share a bed with you. No physical relationship. We'll play our roles. We'll appear as husband and wife to the outside world. But behind closed doors, we're strangers. I don't belong to you. You don't have the right to touch me. Julian's voice remained even. Do you imagine I would force myself on you? Claire? I imagine you're a man who doesn't do anything without a reason. She answered, And I also know that sometimes, what starts as pretend can become more than necessary. I want boundaries. Clear ones. He paused again. Do you have a third? Yes. I don't give up my job. No matter where I'm expected to live. I'll continue working as a nurse. Even part-time. Even at some local clinic. I won't be a silent decoration standing behind you at parties. I need to hold on to some part of my life. Julian exhaled. So softly she almost didn't hear it. Agreed. All 3. 6 months. No pressure. No coercion. And you keep what's yours. Would you like a contract? Claire gave a dry laugh. I assume you have lawyers for that. I want a copy before I sign anything. Of course. He paused again before continuing. A car will pick you up tomorrow morning. 7 sharp. Bring what you need. As of tomorrow. You live with me. She said nothing more. There was no need for promises. No need for thank yous. She ended the call and stood in silence. The rain had stopped. The street outside her window shimmered under the dull yellow glow of the street lamps. Claire walked to the old suitcase that had sat untouched in her closet for years. She began packing piece by piece, not as if she were preparing for a holiday, but as if she were readying herself for a long campaign. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone, not because of Julian, but because she had made a choice. And this time, she would not let anyone else decide her life for her. The car arrived for Claire at exactly 7 in the morning, just as Julian had promised. A black SUV. Its windows tinted dark and its body spotless despite the wet sheen still clinging to the streets after last night's rain. The driver said nothing, offered only a silent nod and a polite tilt of the head as he lifted her single suitcase into the trunk. The ride unfolded in complete silence. Claire didn't speak, and no one spoke to her. She sat in the back seat, hands resting quietly in her lap, eyes fixed on the familiar streets of Chicago, slowly giving way to broader avenues, gleaming high-rises, and corners of the city that looked like they belonged to a different world entirely. When the SUV pulled into the private underground garage of a luxury tower on Michigan Avenue, Claire knew, with complete certainty, that she was about to step into a life unlike anything she had ever known. The security guard at the entrance nodded them through without asking a single question. The elevator that awaited was private, silent, and took her directly to the top floor alone. As the doors opened, she stepped into a space so expansive she had to pause and breathe. The penthouse was perched on the 46th floor, close enough to the sky that it felt as though she could reach out and touch it. Massive glass windows stretched from floor to ceiling, framing the morning shimmer of Lake Michigan in soft, golden light. Every detail of the space was intentional, refined. Rich brown leather chairs, walnut floors, abstract paintings that seemed to know exactly where they belonged. It was a place that whispered power without ever raising its voice. Claire walked slowly inside, her sneakers brushing lightly against the hardwood. A woman in a cream-colored uniform appeared from the kitchen, middle-aged, composed, and smiling with a warmth that didn't feel forced. Miss Bennett. Welcome. I'm Miriam, the housekeeper. If there's anything you need, just let me know. Claire nodded, barely managing a response before Miriam continued. Your room is at the end of the hallway to the right. You can rest, shower, or request something to eat. Mr. Reyes is in meetings and will see you this evening. No one will ask anything of you today. Take the time to settle in. With that, Miriam disappeared, leaving Claire standing alone in a silence so pristine it almost echoed. She exhaled, then pulled her suitcase in the direction she had been shown. Her room was tucked away at the end of a long carpeted hallway, the door opening into a private suite, so serene she could hear her own heartbeat. The bed was large, dressed in crisp white linens that glowed in the natural light pouring through the window. The bathroom was larger than her entire former living room. Glass shower, twin sinks, white towels folded into swan shapes. In the closet hung a curated selection of new clothing, each piece tailored to her size. Claire brushed her fingers along the soft, cool fabric. Everything was beautiful, impeccable, and entirely foreign. She sat on the edge of the bed and let out a breath. It was all too quiet, too clean, too perfect, so much so that it left no room for error. No place for weakness. As if even spilling a glass of water might offend the walls. Claire pulled out her phone, intending to message a coworker to say she'd be stepping away for a while. But her thumb paused above the screen. She didn't know how to explain it. That she had just moved into the home of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. As his fiancé. Even if only on paper. The afternoon drifted by. Slow and quiet. Claire wandered through the apartment. Every corner made her feel more like an outsider in a world that wasn't hers. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel and careful symmetry. So spotless, she was afraid to open a drawer. The reading room held books in English, French, and Spanish. Their spines uncreased. Their arrangement too perfect to disturb. Nothing here bore the chaos of everyday life. Every detail was curated. Not by Julian himself, but by the invisible army that maintained the illusion of him. She found a small door that led to the balcony, 2 chairs facing the city and the sky beyond. The wind rushed in strong, carrying a faint trace of salt from the distant lake. Claire sat, wrapping her arms around herself. She had left her old world behind, a world where she was just a nurse working in shifts, counting down the days to her next paycheck, worrying about rent, groceries, survival. Now she lived in the clouds, staring down at a city she once walked through unnoticed. But in exchange, she now stood on the edge of something else, something that looked like freedom, but might be its opposite. And the man holding the key to everything still hadn't appeared. Claire closed her eyes and let the wind tangle in her hair. If this was a game played by powerful men, then she would learn the rules. But first, she had to learn how to breathe in a world not built for someone like her. The next morning, Claire awoke to soft sunlight seeping through the sheer silk curtains and the quiet knock at her door. For a brief moment, she didn't recognize where she was. Gone was the peeling wall paint and creaking floorboards of her old apartment. In their place was a room 3 times larger than her previous home, wrapped in silence, order, and the unmistakable weight of belonging to a man whose name was spoken in this city with careful caution. Miriam stood just outside with a silver tray, breakfast arranged as if for a guest at a 5-star hotel. She set the tray on a small table by the window, then spoke gently. "Mr. Sticks, Reyes asked that you begin learning your new role today." Claire paused at that. Her new role, just 3 words. Yet they carried a pressure far heavier than she expected. She ate quietly, then dressed in one of the outfits that had been perfectly arranged in the closet, not overly revealing, not stiff or formal, just tailored with unsettling precision. Someone had taken the time to know her measurements, and that alone made her uneasy. When she stepped out of her room, Miriam was waiting. They walked the long hallway together, passing a discreet door that opened into a study so polished and curated it barely looked lived in. Sitting inside was a woman Claire had never seen poised, sharp-eyed, every movement deliberate. The kind of woman who had likely trained dozens of others to survive in rooms where mistakes were unforgivable. "I'm Elena. From today forward, I'll be training you to become Julian Reyes's fiancé. Not his lover, not his girlfriend, his wife, and that carries a very specific weight." Claire said nothing. She didn't nod. She didn't object. She simply listened. Elena wasted no time. She began immediately with posture, with eye contact, with the subtle language of body movement beside a man like Julian. How to smile at the right moment, how to lift her chin when entering a room, how to shield her emotions when someone threw a careless insult cloaked in charm. Claire was taught how to hold a wine glass at a precise 30-degree angle, how to shake hands with the mayor's wife without seeming either too distant or too eager, how to pronounce every French wine label without hesitation, and most importantly, how to mask her gaze when someone mentioned Reyes with an edge of suspicion. After that first session, Claire returned to her room as if she had auditioned for a role in a film she didn't want to star in. Her arms ached from holding unnatural poses. Her back throbbed from sitting impossibly straight for hours. But the worst of it wasn't the physical strain, it was the quiet, creeping realization that she was being reshaped into someone she barely recognized. The days that followed were more of the same. She was taught how to choose outfits based on event type, how to navigate financial headlines well enough to make conversation with billionaires, how to maintain composure when being photographed without warning. Everything had a rule. Nothing was spontaneous. Claire began to understand being the wife of a kingpin wasn't about standing beside him as a woman. It was about standing in front of him as a shield, a symbol, a calculated image of stability and trust. When people looked at Julian Reyes, they were meant to see power. Yes, but when they looked at Claire beside him, they were meant to see legitimacy, warmth, something human. Together, they would make sense in the eyes of the public, a balance of threat and grace. Once, while practicing walking beside a stand-in for Julian, Claire stopped in the middle of the hallway and asked, "Are you sure all of this is necessary?" Elena didn't respond immediately, but when she did, her expression softened for the first time. "No one is born for this world, Claire, but once you're in it, you have to learn how to survive, and your role will protect more people than you realize." Claire didn't ask further. She kept going. She kept practicing, kept memorizing every detail. How to tilt her head, how to rest a hand lightly on Julian's in front of the camera. She still didn't know when her official debut would come, but she did know one thing with growing certainty: every day spent inside this penthouse wasn't just a rehearsal. It was a transformation. From Claire Bennett, night shift nurse, to Claire Reyes, the woman beside a man the city both feared and watched. And though she had no idea what this performance would cost her in the end, she understood one thing completely. If this was a game, she would learn the rules, and when the time came, she would know how to rewrite her role. 3 days later, Claire's first performance officially began. Miriam entered her room early that morning, holding a long list of notes and a burgundy evening gown, carefully hung and waiting on a stand. Tonight marked the grand opening of a major charity foundation, backed and funded by Julian, a glittering event that would draw politicians, media figures, and the city's most influential power players. It was the kind of evening where the elite gathered under the guise of generosity. But every handshake carried an unspoken transaction. Every smile was measured, and it would be the first time Claire appeared publicly at Julian's side as his fiancée. The dress hugged her form with tailored precision, the cut refined, accentuating her figure in a way that was alluring but not overt. Her makeup was subtle, her hair swept into an elegant updo that revealed her neck and the soft shimmer of pearl earrings prepared just for this night. When Claire stepped out of the room, Julian was already waiting in the living room, dressed in a black tuxedo that had been crafted to fit him like a second skin. He didn't offer a compliment. He didn't need to. His gaze lingered a moment too long, and with a quiet nod, he acknowledged that she was ready for the role. On the ride to the venue, words were scarce. Julian simply offered a few short reminders, names to remember, potential questions from reporters, the tone she should keep in certain circles. Claire listened closely, absorbing every detail. This wasn't just a party. It was a test, and failure meant more than embarrassment. It carried consequences. The moment they stepped out of the car, the flashbulbs exploded. Cameras snapped. Reporters surged forward with raised microphones and urgent voices. Julian's hand slid around her waist, a subtle but firm grip that grounded her, a reminder. "Acque," Claire smiled, tilted her head just slightly, and let her gaze meet the cameras without flinching. In that instant, they looked exactly as they were meant to. A perfect power couple. He was composed, intouchable. She was graceful, poised, and between them was just enough space to ignite curiosity, just enough closeness to suggest that what they shared was real. Throughout the evening, Claire moved beside Julian like a shadow shaped by careful rehearsal. She laughed when she needed to, nodded when introductions came, gently rested her hand on his arm when warmth was expected. They clinked glasses together, leaned in for brief, whispered exchanges designed to appear intimate. She noticed the women in the room watching her, their expressions a mixture of interest and skepticism. Not all of them believed it, but all of them paid attention. And that, she knew, was what Julian wanted. At one point, a reporter approached, microphone already lifted. "Congratulations to you both. Mr. Reyes, is this the mysterious fiancé you've never introduced before?" Julian smiled, a rare sight. Even for Claire, not a mystery anymore. "I figured it was time to share an important part of my life with the public. She's the reason I want to be better." Claire tilted her head with a soft smile, her fingers tightening gently on his arm. There had been no script for that answer, but he delivered it as though it were truth he had carried for years. After the event, in the backseat of the car, Claire kicked off her heels and exhaled deeply, stretching her legs and letting her shoulders relax. She hadn't expected that standing beside Julian for a few hours would drain her so completely. Julian looked at her through the rearview mirror, silent for a while, then spoke. "You did better than I expected." Claire leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights drift past like an endless current. He said it as if surprised she hadn't crumbled. "I wasn't performing," she replied. "I was surviving." Julian didn't smile, but something shifted in his eyes, something that resembled respect. "Then keep surviving, because this is only the beginning." Claire closed her eyes, her head tilting just slightly in his direction. She knew, and she knew, too, that this role wouldn't end when the lights went out. It would only end when one of them could no longer hold their ground. The next morning, as sunlight slipped quietly through the sheer curtains, Claire woke with a weight in her chest that she couldn't name. It wasn't exhaustion. Exactly. It was something deeper. A sense that something in the world had shifted while she slept. Her mind was still tangled in images from the night before, the hollow laughter, the clinking glasses, the carefully polite gazes, and Julian's words still echoed through her like a drumbeat. This is only the beginning. She stepped into the kitchen, intending to make herself a cup of coffee, but Miriam was already there, as composed as ever. She placed a small wooden box on the table along with a handwritten note. "From Mr. Reyes," she said simply, and left without another word. The box had a simple latch. Inside were a few seemingly random items: a small, leather-bound notebook, a handful of faded photographs, and a silver external hard drive. Claire opened the notebook first. The handwriting was immediately familiar, slanted, uneven, pressed hard into the page. Her father's notes from years ago. Names, places, account numbers, strings of figures that made little sense to her. She flipped through quickly, stopping when she saw a line written in red ink. "Julian Reyes." She froze. His name was underlined twice. Next to it, a date. Claire stared. That was during her final year of nursing school, not long before her father disappeared. Beside the name was an arrow pointing toward a financial firm she had never heard of before, and the letters "REI" scribbled in all caps. Claire set the notebook down slowly, fingers trembling as she reached for the hard drive. Its contents were messy, a sea of documents, spreadsheets, scanned files, folders with nondescript names, images, video clips. She scrolled, scanning each file name until her eyes landed on one with a date that matched the note in the journal. She clicked it open. The screen flickered, revealing security footage, grainy, silent. High above a polished hallway in what looked like a luxury office building, a group of men stepped out of an elevator. Among them, unmistakably, was Julian. He looked slightly younger, hair longer, but his posture was the same, unhurried, assured, deliberate. He spoke to the man beside him. Then the group disappeared behind a door at the far end of the hallway. The footage stopped there. No sound, no dramatic twist, nothing obvious. And yet Claire knew this wasn't random. She watched it again, then again, searching for something, anything, that would explain why her father had kept it, why this moment had been marked in red. She opened another file. This time, a bank statement. The account had seen a flurry of transfers during the very month her father vanished. Large sums, divided into smaller ones, all funneled into an investment fund registered in New York. Claire searched the fund online. It existed. Barely. Its listed address was real but vague. Its portfolio was private. She kept digging. Every layer of paperwork, every trail she followed, led her back to the same point. Julian. He hadn't just known about her father. He had been there. Present. Active. Intertwined in the chaos that unraveled their lives. He might have been the reason her father disappeared in the first place. He might have helped orchestrate it. And now, years later, he'd placed her in this penthouse, In this life. In this role under the pretense of protection. Of choice. Claire stood up, her chest tightening like a pressure valve about to burst. She walked to the window, staring down at the city that glittered beneath her. Beautiful. Distant. Cold. Julian had planned everything. Even this their meeting. Her presence at his side. Her image as the soft edge to his sharp name. It was all part of some long game she was only beginning to understand. But he hadn't accounted for one thing. She wasn't the girl she used to be. Not anymore. She wasn't just surviving for her father. She was watching. Learning. And now, she knew he was hiding something. She wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. Buried deep in the fragments of a past she had only begun to piece together. If Julian thought she was just another pawn in his game, he was about to learn something far more dangerous. Sometimes, it's the pawn that rewrites the entire board. All afternoon, Claire didn't see Julian. He disappeared from the penthouse as he often did, leaving her alone with a tangle of emotions and a mind flooded with questions that refused to settle. She didn't know if he was aware she had opened the wooden box. She didn't know how many pieces of her life he had placed on the board before she even knew he existed. But one thing she knew with certainty: she was caught between two shores, anger and curiosity. By nightfall, the city outside sank into a glow of amber lights and distant horns. Claire hadn't left the balcony. The wind was cold, but she didn't feel it. Her mind kept circling the same loop: Julian in the hallway from that security footage. His name scrawled in her father's handwriting. The quiet, relentless sense that none of this had ever been accidental. She flinched at the sound of the door opening behind her. Julian stepped out. Sleeves of his white shirt rolled to the elbows. 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He moved toward her slowly, eyes sharp and unreadable, studying every flicker of her expression. "You haven't eaten," he said. Claire didn't answer right away. She turned to the skyline, eyes following the curve of the lake in the distance. "I'm not hungry." He set one glass down on the stone railing, standing beside her, not too close, but not far enough for her to ignore the weight of his presence. "Seems like you found something interesting today," he added, voice calm as ever. Claire turned to him, her eyes darker now. "That's why you left the box. To see how I'd react." Julian didn't deny it. He shrugged, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You deserve to know part of it, but not all of it." She clenched her hands. "And the rest? What is that? That you were watching my father before he disappeared? That you showed up in a hallway at the exact moment everything began to fall apart?" Julian was quiet for a moment. The wind tousled his hair, but his eyes never left hers. "It's not as simple as you want it to be. If you're expecting a confession, I don't have one. And if you want the whole truth, then you need to understand it comes with a cost you might not want to pay." Claire let out a dry laugh. "I already have. I paid with 4 years of not knowing if my father was alive. I paid with a life that unraveled and a career I had to claw back together. I paid with this marriage that was never a marriage to begin with." Julian stepped closer, not rushing, just closing the space with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't force his way in. He waited for doors to open. But this time, he said nothing. He only looked at her, for a long time, as if waiting for something to shift. And when Claire lifted her gaze, she saw it. Not an excuse, not a wall of control, but a crack, a small fracture in his carefully built stillness. Then he lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and touched her cheek. Claire didn't move away, but she didn't lean in either. She stood still, her breath slowing as his fingers brushed against her chilled skin. Julian lowered his face toward hers, not urgently, giving her time to recoil. But she didn't. And when his lips found hers, it was not with the hunger she expected from a man like him. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't control. It was quiet. It was a question, and she didn't answer with words. The kiss lingered not in passion, but in the strange honesty of 2 people who had stripped away too much to pretend anymore. When he pulled back, their eyes stayed locked. Claire didn't speak, but she felt it. Everything had changed. Not just the space between them, but the way she saw him now. Julian Reyes, the man she had believed to be a strategist, a puppeteer, a name wrapped in shadows. In this moment, he was also something else. The first person to make her feel like more than a piece in someone's game. Like a person, a woman, someone seen and touched, and not asked to perform. And that more than any secret, more than any lie, was the most terrifying thing she had ever known. Claire couldn't sleep after that kiss. She lay still in the dark, the soft city light bleeding through the sheer curtains, casting restless patterns on the ceiling. Her heart still beat fast, but not only from what Julian had stirred in her. It was something else, a shadow behind the warmth, a tight knot in her chest that whispered what she didn't yet dare to say out loud. Something was wrong, something Julian hadn't told her. And Claire had the sinking feeling that another door was about to open, this one leading somewhere far more dangerous. The next morning, she was in the reading room, trying to focus on a book, her eyes dragging across lines of text without comprehension, when Miriam entered, as quietly as always. "There's someone waiting for you in the lobby," she said softly. "He claims to be an old friend of your father. He's not on any appointment list, but he refuses to leave." A cold ripple traveled down Claire's spine. Her father had never spoken of any old friends, and certainly not the kind who would bypass Julian's careful circle and come straight to her. She stepped into the elevator, a heavy sense of unease sinking deeper with each floor. When the doors slid open, she saw a man standing with his back to her, gray overcoat, polished black shoes, posture unnaturally straight. When he turned, she immediately understood why Miriam had felt the need to warn her. This wasn't a friend, at least not the kind anyone trying to live a quiet life would ever keep. He looked to be in his early 40s, with dark brown eyes and slicked back hair, his face chiseled like it had been carved from stone. Cold, controlled, unreadable. Claire had never seen him before, but the name he spoke froze the air around them. "Marco Alvarez." "A pleasure, Miss Bennett," he said, voice low and textured, like it came from deep inside a cave. "I'm not here to threaten you, only to offer a reminder." Claire didn't blink. "You knew my father?" "Know is a strong word, but I met him before he disappeared, and I told him the same thing I'm about to tell you. Be careful with Julian Reyes." Claire said nothing, but Marco went on, calm and deliberate. "I don't deny he's smart, calculated, powerful, but none of that makes him trustworthy. Do you think he chose you because of love? Because out of the hundreds of women who'd do anything just to be seen beside him, you were the one?" Claire held her ground. Marco stepped closer. "I don't need you to believe me. I only want you to understand one thing. What your father got involved in this wasn't small. And Julian wasn't the man who pulled him out. He was the man who pushed him in. And when it served him, he was the one who reached down to pretend to save him. You think you're the exception, but you're not. You're just another piece on the board. And every piece eventually gets replaced." Claire's hands clenched at her sides. "If you know so much, why haven't you helped my father? Why show up now? Speaking in riddles like some ghost in the dark?" Marco smiled faintly. "You're clever. That's exactly why I came. Because clever people always have a choice." And then he turned and walked away, leaving Claire standing there with her heart pounding like war drums in her chest. Back in the elevator, her mind spiraled. Who could she trust? She had once believed Julian was the only one bringing her closer to the truth. But now she wasn't sure if she was being pulled out of the darkness or pushed deeper into it. And if Marco was right, then time was running out. She stepped back into the mirrored elevator and stared at her own reflection. A poised woman, polished, every line and angle crafted to fit the image of the kingpin's fiancé. But behind the glass, Claire saw something else, something sharper, something waking up. The real fight hadn't started last night. It started now. And if she wasn't careful, this time, she wouldn't walk away at all. Claire returned to the penthouse with spinning thoughts and hands so cold they trembled. Even though the hallways were flushed with the warmth of central heat, she said nothing to Miriam about the man downstairs. She wasn't ready for Julian to know, at least. Not yet. Marco Alvarez could be anyone. An old rival. An enemy. A serpent dressed as a savior. But his words clung to her, echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat she couldn't unhear. Julian pushed your father down, then reached out to pull him up. If that was true, then everything she was living this home. This role. This connection she was starting to believe in was a trap dressed in carefully curated trust. And if she didn't dig deeper, she'd never know what was real, and what was just another move on his board. That night, when Julian left the apartment for a meeting downstairs, Claire moved. She stepped into his office, a place she had never crossed into not because it was forbidden, but because something about it felt bound by an invisible thread she hadn't dared unravel. Until now. The room was so precisely kept it bordered on sterile. Not a speck of dust. Not a single object out of place. She moved to the desk. Opened the drawer. Inside, a locked file box. She started to close it until she saw something underneath. A small black leather notebook. Unmarked. No title. No labels. She opened it, and her breath stopped. Transaction logs. Dates. Names. Some she didn't recognize. But one name cut through the page like a blade. Paul Bennett. Her father. Further down the list. Underlined twice in red ink. Alvarez. She flipped the pages quickly. Near the back, a hand-drawn network map. Lines branching out from a single name at the center. Reyes. Webbed extensions leading to offshore accounts. Holding companies. And there again REI. The same financial firm tied to the documents she'd found in her father's files. Claire took out her phone, hands shaking, and began snapping pictures of each page. Her heart pounded. Hard. Relentless. As if trying to warn her, this is it. She moved to the computer next. The screen was still glowing. The system unlocked. Too easy. Too convenient. But she didn't hesitate. Inside the documents folder, a file named for Claire Bennett. She opened it, and her world lurched. Dozens of pages. Every piece of her life. Her school records. Work history. Medical files from childhood. Her known addresses. Her social connections. Even details she didn't remember sharing with anyone. Julian had known her long before they ever met. She hadn't been chosen by chance. She had been tracked. Selected. Designed to fit into a plan whose edges she still couldn't see. Claire took a step back from the screen. Arms at her sides. The silence in the room was deafening. It was no longer a question. Julian hadn't found her. He had been watching her. And maybe, just maybe, the feelings she was starting to have, the ones he seemed to return, were never part of something real. Just part of the script. The door clicked open. Claire jumped. She slammed the laptop shut. Shoved the notebook back into the drawer. Forced herself to breathe. Calm. Controlled. Julian walked in. Quiet as always. Still wearing the soft smile that never reached his eyes. "You're still awake," he said. His voice gentler than usual. Claire nodded, turning toward the window to hide the tremble in her jaw. "I couldn't sleep. Probably just tired." He stepped closer, reaching to touch her shoulder. She moved just slightly to the side. He paused. His hand dropped. He didn't ask. Claire retreated to her room soon after. She closed the door, but the weight followed her inside. She had once believed that if she was patient, if she was strong, she could manage this game, outlast it, bend it to her will. But now she saw it clearly. She'd never been ahead. She was always reacting, always catching up. And if she didn't want to remain the hunted, she needed a plan. Not to confront Julian. Not yet. But to get ahead of him. To know more than he thought she knew. Because trust was no longer a foundation. It was the very thing turning her into prey. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her chest tight, her pulse still racing. The silence. The quiet manipulation. The polished charm, none of it could cover the truth anymore. Marco's warning. Julian's secrets. The documents. The lies. It was all converging. And she could feel it. The time for waiting was over. She needed answers. And this time, she would find them herself. Not by guessing. Not by obeying. Not by hoping. But by hunting. She arranged to meet Marco the next morning. Discreetly. Without going through anyone, not Julian. Not Miriam. Not a single shadow that might report back to the penthouse. She sent a single text to the number he had left tucked under her coffee cup days earlier. One line. No pleasantries. No hesitation. Asterisk. We need to talk. An hour later, Marco replied with a location, a worn-down bar hidden in a narrow alley of South Loop. The kind of place no one would think to look for a woman like Claire Bennett. Or a man like Marco Alvarez. He was already there when she arrived. Same cold eyes. Same stillness that seemed to settle into the room like smoke. She didn't waste a single breath. "If you know everything about my father," she said, sitting across from him. Her voice steady. Her stare unwavering. "Then now's the time to tell me. All of it. No riddles. No conditions." Marco leaned back, eyes never leaving hers. He took a sip of his dark coffee, then gave a slow nod. "You deserve to know. But understand this, the truth won't make you feel safer." His voice was low, deliberate, slicing through the early quiet like a blade. "Years ago, your father, Paul Bennett, was assigned to a federal investigation into cross-border laundering operations. He was embedded inside an investment firm in New York, a front, really, for far more dangerous transactions. And somewhere along the way, he found something. Not Julian. Me." Claire froze. Marco met her gaze without flinching. "That's right. Your father uncovered evidence that could have brought me down. But instead of turning it in, he disappeared. Not because he chose to vanish, but because I left him no other option." "You took him?" Her voice was sharp now, breath-catching. "Not exactly," Marco said, his mouth curling slightly at the edge. "I didn't abduct him. I created the circumstances where disappearing was the only move left on the board. A man who knows too much is a threat. But killing him? Wasteful. I kept him. As leverage. A contingency. You could call it a hostage. If you prefer honesty." Claire could barely breathe. "And when Julian started rising, I knew it was only a matter of time before our paths would cross. He's smart, but not careful. And emotion? That's his flaw." He looked at her pointedly. Asterisk. Your time's his flaw. Claire's hands clenched into fists. "So what? You used me?" Marco nodded without shame. "At first, I just watched. But when Julian brought you in, when he made you part of his times equation, I knew the timing was right. I let pieces of the truth slip. I left breadcrumbs. I made sure you would start to doubt. Because only when you stop trusting Julian can I pull you to my side." The floor beneath her felt like it was crumbling. Everything she thought she'd uncovered, every moment she believed she had earned through determination and instinct, it wasn't discovery. It was manipulation. She hadn't found the truth. She'd been led to it. By the very man who had made her father disappear. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why not anyone else?" "Because you're the only one who could make him blink," Marco said. "Julian doesn't listen to threats. He doesn't bend for pressure. But if you turn on him, if you step out of line, he'll start to lose his balance. And when that happens, men like Julian, they make mistakes." Claire stood. The wooden chair scraped back across the floor with a harsh sound. Her voice was low, but filled with steel. "I'm not a weapon. I'm Paul Bennett's daughter, and I will bring him back." Marco's lips curved, part approval, part amusement. "Good. You should. But remember, in this game, everyone's playing a role. Even those who never wanted to act." She walked out of the bar with the city pressing in around her. The weight of revelation like a storm cloud sitting behind her ribs. She had been used. Again. But this time, she had seen the face of times, both times players. And if Marco Alvarez thought she would return to being a pawn on his board, he had miscalculated. Claire was no longer the woman who needed rescuing. Now, she was the one coming to rescue her father. And if that meant dismantling both of the most dangerous men in this city, one secret at a time, one betrayal at a time, then so be it. She would not flinch. She returned to the penthouse under cover of twilight. The city's lights flared beneath her like a maze built to trap the desperate. But she no longer felt cornered. She wasn't coming home as someone betrayed. The fury had quieted. The doubt dissolved. What remained was focus. A clarity sharper than anything she'd known since this began. Marco thought he could use her. Julian thought he already had. But they had both made the same fatal mistake. They forgot that the girl chasing answers had become the woman who asked the questions. And now, she times was choosing sides. And Claire had made her choice. Julian was in his study when she walked in. He looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at the sound of the door opening without a knock. He started to speak. But Claire raised her hand. "No explanations," she said. "I know you've been watching me. And I know I met Marco." Julian stood slowly, eyes guarded, her voice quieter. "Are you okay?" Claire looked at him. Calm, eerily calm. The kind of stillness that came only after a storm had settled, or when the next one was about to break. "No. But I understand now. Marco didn't come because of you. He came because of my father. Because I'm the one person who could bring you down by turning against you." She took a step closer. But he was wrong. Julian's expression shifted, softened. "You trust me?" She nodded. "I don't know everything you've done, and I don't need to. But I do know this: if my father is still alive, if he's safe, it's not because of Marco. It's because of times you... and now I need you to help me bring him home. Not by using me as a bargaining chip, but by hitting back." Julian was silent for a moment, then gently wrapped his fingers around hers. "You just stepped into a real war, Claire. This isn't like anything you've ever known." She gave a faint smile. "I know, and I'm not stepping in to stand behind you. I'm stepping in to stand beside you." They spent the rest of that night in the hidden war room behind the library, Julian's most private sanctuary, a place even most of his closest people didn't know existed. Claire studied the maps spread out on the table. Communication networks, names of shell corporations, encrypted fund transfers, every path traced back to Marco. She saw satellite images of a remote compound buried deep in the forest near the border, surrounded by fences and shadows. According to the data, that's where her father was being held. Julian laid out the plan. They would create a false mistake. Something sloppy. Something loud. Enough to convince Marco that he had finally won. And while he celebrated, Claire would lead a strike team to the camp. Julian wouldn't be with her. If he appeared, it would unravel everything. But he trusted her. Completely. Claire trained for 2 days with his private security unit. She learned how to use a comm device, how to read terrain, how to memorize the compound layout by instinct. Julian assigned her the best in his team. In a rare moment of quiet between drills, Julian touched her cheek and said, "I was wrong. I thought I could protect you by pushing you away." Claire gripped his hand. "Don't now. I need you here. Not as someone who's stronger, but as someone who believes in me the way I believe in you." The night before the mission, they stood side by side on the balcony, watching the city sleep beneath them. Neither of them spoke, but in that silence, something shifted again. There were no more roles, no more performances. They weren't playing parts anymore. At dawn, Claire zipped up her light armor, slipped a knife into the sheath at her side, and climbed into the waiting vehicle. Her eyes were sharp, steady. She was no longer Claire Bennett, the nurse who survived night shifts and silent grief. She was a daughter stepping into the wolf's den to take back the man they had stolen from her. And this time, she had one mission: to end everything Marco Alvarez had started. With her, with her father, with Julian. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the life they had stolen. And she would take it back, piece by piece, no matter what it cost. Rain pounded against the glass of the 63rd floor, each drop striking with the weight of a warning. The sky over Chicago had turned a deep, bruised gray by dusk, and from the moment Claire stepped back into the penthouse, soaked with exhaustion from her final day of training, she felt it something was wrong. She and Julian had finalized the plan. Tomorrow, she would leave, lead the strike team to the remote forest compound near the border, and, if luck held, bring her father home. But luck never held in a game like this. The alarm shattered the silence. It wasn't a fire alarm. It was sharper, more violent. The The kind of sound built into private systems for one reason only: armed intrusion. Claire froze for half a heartbeat, then bolted into the hallway, her pulse roaring. Where was Julian? Miriam ran past her, pale and breathless. 6 of them, armed. They bypassed the security floor in under a minute. The system's been breached. They're in the emergency elevator now. Claire didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the control room. On the surveillance screen, 6 red dots rose rapidly toward the top floor. 1 blue dot pulsed alone. Julian. He was trapped. Claire grabbed the earpiece from a technician, her voice cutting through the panic. Connect me to Julian. Asterisk now. A beat later, his voice broke through the static. Claire. You can't be here. Get out. Asterisk. Now. No, she said, her tone sharp with resolve. I'm not leaving you. I know what I'm doing. She didn't wait for his reply. She ran to the weapons cache 2 floors below. For the first time in her life, Claire donned a real tactical vest. She clipped a sidearm to her hip, slid a knife into the sheath at her sleeve, and breathed once deep and steady. There was no room for fear now, no space for hesitation. She knew the passageways. She knew the plan. And she knew if she didn't get to Julian in time, none of this would matter. 3 men had already split from the main group. Claire crept along the wall, listening. 1, 2, 3. She struck first. A punch to the throat dropped the first. The second turned, weapon raised. But Claire barreled into him before he could fire, disarmed him, and drove him into the floor. The third lunged toward her, then crumpled with a cry as a blast took him down. Miriam stepped forward. Shotgun, still smoking. Eyes like steel. I'm not letting you go in alone, she said, then moved ahead without waiting for thanks. They raced up the final staircase. Gunfire cracked from behind the sealed door of the command suite. Julian was still fighting. Claire kicked the door open, rolled in. Julian was crouched behind his desk, gun nearly empty, chest heaving. When he saw her, his eyes widened. Claire, are you times insane? Asterisk. No, she said. I'm times right on time. She crawled to him, handed him the spare weapon she'd taken. Behind them, Miriam held the line, buying them precious seconds. Together, without needing a single word, Claire and Julian moved as one. 1 shot. 2. Another body hit the ground. Then another. When the last man faltered, Claire didn't stop. She surged forward and dropped him with a swift, brutal kick to the chest. Silence fell. Broken glass. Shallow breaths. And beyond the wreckage, the sound of rain tapping steadily against the windows, some shattered, some whole. Claire turned to Julian. I told you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Asterisk, I won't leave you alone. Julian reached for her hand, fingers closing over hers with a pressure that was no longer measured, no longer strategic. In his eyes, there was no trace of the cold tactician, only a man who had nearly died, and realized in that moment what truly mattered. The 3 of them stood amid the wreckage, lungs heaving, alive. And Claire understood, more clearly than ever. This wasn't a role. This wasn't a contract. This was war. This was truth. This was a new beginning, not of a plan, but of a purpose. And from this moment on, she would not let anyone else write the ending. Claire sat on the stairwell leading out to the balcony, her palms still faintly stained with the scent of gunpowder and the scorched dust lingering from the command room that had only just been swept clean. Outside, the rain still drizzled softly, not in heavy sheets like the night before, but in a gentle murmur, as if the sky itself whispered that things were not yet settled. She leaned her back against the railing, her mind oddly blank after the hours of life and death that had just passed. Julian stepped out behind her, no longer wearing a vest or carrying the composed formality that usually clung to him. He was just a man now. Sleeves rolled high, dried blood at his wrist, and a gaze that had softened in the wake of exhaustion. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a long while. I should thank you, Julian said at last. Claire glanced at him, offering a half-smile. For shooting well or for not leaving you behind? Both, he replied, meeting her eyes. But more than that. For choosing me when you had every reason to walk away. Claire clenched her hand slightly. That wasn't an easy choice. I doubted you. I thought I was just a tool to you. And if Marco hadn't shown his face when he did, I might still be strung along like some puppet. Julian nodded slowly. I won't deny it. At first, you were part of the plan. But things changed. Claire, I changed. Not because I was afraid to lose you, but because, for the first time in my life, I wanted to hold on to something not through power, but through truth. She said nothing, letting the wind sweep past her hair and the dampness of night cling gently to her skin. Claire had never been one to put faith in promises. But now, she didn't need Julian to vow anything. She needed only one thing. If we make it through this, I don't want to live the rest of my life in another lie. Not because of my father. Not because of your past. Not because of what we agreed to at the beginning. I want it all to be real. Julian leaned his head back against the railing, then nodded softly. Then we start over. No more titles. No more arrangements. No more secrets. He stood, extending his hand to her in silent invitation. No roses. No rings. No ceremony lights. Just a man who had lived too long in the dark. And a woman brave enough to walk into that darkness to find a flicker of light for them both. Claire looked at his hand for a moment, then placed hers in his. The grip wasn't tight. It didn't have to be. It was just enough to remind her that this time, she wasn't walking alone. When Julian pulled her into his arms and held her close, she felt for the first time her heart beating not out of fear or resistance, but in quiet certainty. It beat as if to confirm that despite everything, the betrayals, the deceptions, the wounds, this moment was real. Love had not been what they were searching for, but somehow, in the middle of all the chaos, they had found it. And when Claire whispered, "I'm not pretending anymore," Julian answered not with words, but with a kiss that said everything. This time, it wasn't to hide, not to convince anyone, but to mark a new beginning, a connection no longer bound by contracts or calculation. Just two people, after everything, choosing to stay for each other. And for the first time, Claire wasn't afraid to rest her hand over Julian's heart, where his heartbeat matched her own. Late spring in Napa Valley painted a picture that needed no correction. The vineyards stretched endlessly to the base of the rolling hills, and the golden sunlight poured down over each branch, each blade of grass, as though honey had been drizzled across the land. Atop a quiet hill, where the breeze carried hints of lavender and the deep, a warm scent of oak barrels aged with time. An outdoor chapel had been set with ivory and muted gold as its palette. There were no ornate decorations, no noisy crowds, only those who truly mattered, and two people who had walked a path longer, more complex, and more profound than most marriages ever encounter. Claire stood before the mirror in a small wooden room behind the chapel. Her wedding dress fit her perfectly, gently following the curves of her frame without shouting for attention. Her hair was gathered into a soft bun, adorned with a silver hairpin Julian had chosen himself. There was no dramatic makeup, no theatrical display typical of weddings in powerful circles. Everything was kept simple, elegant, and true to who they were. There was nothing left to prove. They had already proven it through blood, through truth, and through trust rebuilt from the ashes. Miriam stepped in, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She made no attempt to hide. Claire smiled at her through the mirror. Miriam gently took her hand. "You've walked farther than most would dare. And today, you're no longer a girl choosing between safety and love. You are yourself." Claire nodded, her throat tight with feeling. She stepped out just as the first gentle notes of the violin floated through the air. The aisle between the two rows of chairs was strewn with soft white petals. Julian stood at the end, dressed in a charcoal gray tuxedo, a sprig of lavender pinned to his lapel. He looked at her with eyes that held nothing back. No shadows. No defenses. Only the gaze of a man waiting for the woman who had become his whole world. Claire could not recall how long she walked. She only knew that each step was a note struck gently against memory, the echo of hospital corridors during rainy nights, The moment a strange car pulled up to the curb, silent conversations beneath the glow and gloom of a penthouse that had held both light and dark. And then, the sound of her own heartbeat when they kissed for the first time. When she reached him, and the music faded. The entire valley seemed to pause in reverence. There was no minister. No elaborate ritual. Only the two of them, standing face to face, exchanging vows as though they had already lived a lifetime together and still wanted to live every day to come. "I won't promise to make you laugh every day," Julian said, his voice trembling just slightly. "But I promise I'll never let you be alone when you cry." Claire met his eyes, hers bright with tears that didn't fall. "I won't promise to always understand you, but I promise I'll keep choosing to stay, even when I don't." Miriam handed them the rings. Simple circles like time itself without beginning or end. When Julian slid the ring onto her finger, Claire felt something quietly close over every place she had once been lost. Their first kiss as husband and wife was not a burst of fireworks. It was quiet, warm, and so achingly real that those who witnessed it turned away, blinking back tears. As they stepped away from the altar, the applause that followed was not loud, but it was honest. The sky above Napa Valley remained impossibly clear, and Claire knew that whatever might lie ahead, however uncertain or unfinished, she had stepped into it with a choice that no longer wavered. This time, she did not marry because of an agreement, not because of pressure, not because of fear. She married him because she loved him, and that alone was enough to begin a new chapter. A chapter she would write with her own hands. The afternoon breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying with it the scent of ripened grapes from the vineyards sprawled across the Napa Valley below. Claire sat alone in the small room tucked behind the villa where they had held the wedding just a day before. There was no murmur of voices, no applause, no lingering notes from the violin. Only a gentle silence remained, and an unspoken question that had quietly waited its turn. What would she do? After everything? On the table were 2 envelopes. One held a plane ticket, a passport, a new identity, and a clean chance to walk away from it all. Julian had prepared it himself. No persuasion, no pressure. He had said only one thing: "You have the right to choose." The other envelope contained the official documents for Claire to take over a position in one of the Rhea's charitable foundations. A project Julian had started years ago but left incomplete, waiting for someone he could truly trust. This was not just a job. It was a statement that if she chose to stay, she would not merely be the wife of a man with power, nor just a shadow moving through that world. She would be the one to turn that power into something useful, something with meaning. Claire stood up and stepped out onto the balcony. Below in the courtyard, Julian was speaking with Miriam. The sunlight cast a golden sheen over his hair, and for a brief moment, he no longer looked like the man who had appeared on that rainy night so long ago. Eyes cold, offering a life-changing deal. He looked like a man who had given her a choice, knowing full well it could mean losing her forever. Claire thought back on everything they had endured, the moments of doubt, of betrayal, the long road back to trust, the times they faced death, not just from enemies, but from wounds too deep for words. She had once believed she was just a pawn on the board controlled by powerful men, but now, with everything quieted, she understood. She was the one who had stepped to the center of the board. She picked up the 2 envelopes and walked down to the courtyard. Julian saw her approach. His eyes didn't question, didn't press. Claire raised the envelope with the plane ticket and slowly tore it apart, the pieces fluttering to the ground like the last leaves of a passing season. "I had the chance to leave," she said, her voice clear and steady like the sun overhead. "But I don't want a life protected by running away. I'm not staying because of you, even though I love you. I'm staying because of me. Because for the first time in my life, I get to choose the path I walk." Julian stepped forward and took her hand. Saying nothing, Miriam stepped back quietly, offering them the moment, a small smile on her face before she turned away to leave the space for just the 2 of them. Claire looked up at Julian, her gaze calm for the first time, steady and unburdened. "I've come full circle," she said quietly. "And now, I choose to begin again, right from the place I once believed I was merely passing through." Julian tightened his grip on her hand slowly, as if he wanted to etch every word she spoke into his memory. Then this time, we go together. No one leads. No one follows. Claire nodded. No declarations. No promises. Because when a woman knows exactly what she is choosing, she doesn't need anyone to validate it. And from that moment forward, Claire Bennett was no longer someone pulled into the underworld. She was someone who chose to walk into it with eyes wide open, a steady heart, and a belief no longer shaken. 6 months later, Chicago's cold had arrived earlier than usual. Along Michigan Avenue, the trees wore brilliant shades of gold and amber, their leaves drifting to the ground like quiet punctuation marks signaling the end of a season. In the tallest building downtown, once a space reserved for icy transactions and silent power plays, there was now a modest office, with glass walls opening out to the entire city. On the desk, a stack of files lay neatly arranged. Behind it stood Claire Bennett, speaking on the phone with a tone more composed and incisive than ever before. "The project in Honduras has launched," she said, her voice firm and measured. "I want to make sure the funding reaches the regional health center on time. The agreement with the nonprofit is signed. Go ahead and pass it to legal for final clearance before it's sent." When the call ended, she rose and walked toward the window, watching the flow of traffic below move like blood through the veins of the living city. 6 months ago, she had believed she didn't belong here. Now, without needing anyone to remind her, Claire knew with certainty she was no longer on the outside looking in. She wasn't just Julian Reyes's wife. She was part of the empire he had built. Not by name, by role. Claire was now running a philanthropic investment fund carved from a branch of the Reyes financial group. Under her leadership, figures that once existed only in spreadsheets had become hospitals, in schools, addiction recovery centers, and support programs for women escaping abuse. She hadn't erased the shadows of the past, but she had chosen to illuminate them, and that made her stronger than any woman who had ever stepped into this world. Julian entered the room, his coat still flecked with a few drops of autumn rain. He looked at her with a smile that needed no greeting. They had grown accustomed to this rhythm, the sharp meetings that stretched through daylight, the late dinners after reports. But no matter how long the day, every time Julian stepped into this room, his eyes still found Claire's as they had on the day she first chose to stay. "Any word from Washington?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. Claire nodded and handed him a folder. "They're ready to move forward," she said, "but they're asking for a full independent audit of the funding stream." I agreed. "Everything will be transparent. If we're going to rebuild trust in a world once driven by fear alone, then there's only one way to do it: begin with the truth." Julian remained silent, then gently took her hand. He had never truly believed this day would come, that someone once a stranger to the world of power and shadow could step inside and begin to change it from within. But Claire had never needed anyone's approval. She had proven herself, not through grand gestures or titles, but through every project she led, every decision she made, every late night spent in quiet focus, not for praise, but because she understood she was doing what needed to be done. Miriam appeared in the doorway, knocking softly. "The meeting with the oversight team is starting." Claire rose, adjusted her collar, and walked out without looking back. Julian watched her go, and in his gaze was more than love. There was reverence. Claire was no longer a woman to be protected, no longer a piece on someone else's board. She was now an indispensable part of the very empire he had once built with blood and power, and she was turning it into something greater, something useful, something lasting. And in the firm steps she took, there was the silence of someone who had known loss, the strength of someone who had chosen to stay, and the quiet conviction of someone who understood that choice was not just a freedom, it was a responsibility, and she was ready to bear it not for anyone else, but for herself. Certainly, as your Vietnamese English translation specialist, my role is to translate your Vietnamese source text into English with precision, emotional depth, and narrative resonance. This translation is crafted in a reflective, cinematic storytelling style, deeply evocative and visually rich, designed to resonate with a mature American audience, particularly those aged 45 and older. All numerals have been converted to words. The paragraph remains continuous, with no added symbols, headings, or line breaks, and all details preserved exactly as provided. Here is the full translation. On an autumn afternoon, Claire sat alone on the rooftop terrace of the tallest floor in the Reyes building. A cool breeze brushed gently through her neatly tied hair, and the late-day sunlight stretched across the glass panes like a ribbon of silk. Below, the city was slipping into the chaos of rush hour, loud, hurried, unrelenting, but up where she sat, it was remarkably still. 6 months ago, she had believed that freedom meant walking away from everything without looking back. But today, in the very heart of the power that once terrified her, she understood more clearly than ever that freedom is not about escape. Freedom is the ability to choose your own path, untouched by the past or by anyone else's expectations. She had been given the chance to leave, to begin again in a place where no one knew her name, where there was no blood-soaked legacy, no Julian Reyes, no shadows. But she had chosen to stay, and that decision had opened the door to a new life. No more coercion, no more bargains, no more pretending. Claire Bennett was now a woman fully her own, living with clarity and conviction. Julian was no longer the source of suspicion, but the man who had stood beside her through the hardest trials, so they could now face the world grounded in truth. Claire's story was not simply one of survival within the underworld, but a journey of reclaiming self-worth, of finding the courage to face her choices, and the strength to rewrite her fate with her own hands. And perhaps the deepest lesson we can take from this story is this: sometimes, the very things that hurt us the most are what make us grow. Love does not always begin with tenderness. Sometimes it begins with doubt, with struggle, and even with fracture. But if we are brave enough to face it, to forgive, and to trust, then that love can grow stronger and more enduring than anything we have known. Claire's story is also a quiet reminder for anyone who has ever felt powerless in their own life, for anyone who has lived according to someone else's choices. Remember this: only you hold the right to decide. No matter the circumstance, no matter how far you've been pushed or how lost you once felt, you always have the power to choose again. We believe that many of our viewers watching this video may see parts of themselves in Claire. Perhaps you are a single mother carrying the weight of the world. Perhaps you are a woman who gave up so much to hold on to a family or a career. Or perhaps you are simply someone searching for your voice again. We hope you've felt some light, some hope, through this story. Please leave a comment below and share your honest thoughts as you followed Claire's journey. What did you think of her decision? And if you were in her place, what would you have done? Your heartfelt reflections help us understand you more and inspire us to continue sharing meaningful content. And if this story touched something within you, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends and loved ones. The YouTube channel Dear Single Mom welcomes you every day with stories that are moving, honest, and deeply human. Each video is a glimpse into a real life, a quiet lesson, a moment of connection we hope to bring to our community. Thank you for giving us your precious time on this journey. We wish you good health, a life filled with peace, joy, and presence in every moment. Farewell, and we'll see you in the next video.